Somebody turns 100, and a reporter shows up with a notepad and asks the wrong question. It happens every time. The cake, the flowers, the camera from the local station, and then, what is your secret? By the end of this, you will have the question nobody asks them, and a reason to ask it of yourself tonight. Because she answers, he writes it down, and everyone goes home happy. So why is it that after a century of asking, no two of those answers have ever matched? Verbania, in northern Italy, November of 2016. A woman named Emma Morano is turning 117, and the reporters are back in her small apartment because she is the last living person on Earth who was born in the 1800s. They ask her the question. She gives them the list. 3 eggs a day, 2 of them raw, ever since a doctor told her to eat them when she was a young woman. A little homemade grappa. That is what ran in newspapers on 4 continents. Raw eggs. She told the New York Times something else that week, and it did not travel nearly as far. In 1938, after losing her only child as a baby, she walked out of a marriage to a violent man, and she never lived with a husband again. Almost 80 years in her own rooms, on her own terms. What she told the paper was that she had not wanted to be dominated by anyone. That is the ritual. Right there. We ask a 100-year-old for a list of things, and she hands us one because a list is what we asked for. Then we print the eggs. Before we go further, do something for me. Put your age in the comments and tell me what time you got up this morning. I read every one of them, and that second answer is going to matter more than you think by the end of this. Now line the lists up next to each other, which is the part nobody does. In Brooklyn, Susanna Mushat Jones ate 4 strips of bacon every single morning, with eggs and grits beside them, and she kept doing it until she died at 116. She never drank, and she never smoked, and she credited her sleep. In Austin, Texas, Richard Overton smoked 12 cigars a day and poured whiskey into his morning coffee, and he lived to 112 as the oldest American veteran of the Second World War. He liked to say that he did not inhale them, as though that settled the matter. Bessie Cooper, in Georgia, was asked for her secret by the people at Guinness World Records. She told them she minds her own business, and she does not eat junk food. Geraldine Talley, in Michigan, credited hog's head cheese and pork, along with doing unto others as you would want them to do unto you. And in Japan, Kane Tanaka, who reached 119, liked chocolate and fizzy drinks. And when Guinness handed her a certificate and a box of chocolates, she said she intended to get through 100 of them. One of them never touched a drop. One of them had whiskey in his coffee before breakfast. One would not go near junk food, and one met a world record with a box of 100 chocolates. Put any 2 of those breakfasts in the same kitchen, and somebody is losing an argument. If a single one of those lists were the cause, the rest of these people should not have made it past 90. And before anybody says it, no, it is not simply the genes. Only about a quarter of a human lifespan traces back to what you inherited, which is research I have gone through on this channel before. The rest is the life you actually live. If the lists were the answer, this would be a much shorter video. Read the rest of the interview instead. Not the answer, the parts around it, the details the reporter puts in because he needs a paragraph before the quote. Geraldine Talley bowled. She kept bowling until she was 104, and she gave it up then only because her legs would not hold her. She rolled a 200 once. She sewed dresses, she made quilts, and she liked the slot machines. Kane Tanaka woke at 6 in the morning. She studied arithmetic in the afternoons, practiced calligraphy, and played the board game Othello against the staff at her home, where she had a reputation for beating them. Richard Overton had a porch he built with his own hands, and he sat on it, and people came by, and that was the shape of every day he had. Nobody ever asks about the bowling. That is the part that repeats. Ask a 100-year-old about her diet, and somewhere in the answer, uninvited, you will get her sister, her garden, the person who comes on Tuesdays, the thing she does at 6 in the morning that nobody asked her to do and nobody pays her for. It arrives without being requested, in interview after interview, and it lands in the paragraph nobody reads. We ask them what they put in their bodies. They keep telling us what they get up for. The pattern is sitting there in plain sight in 100 years of birthday interviews. What happened when researchers went and measured it is stranger than the interviews ever suggested. If you have been here a while, you know the Japanese have a word for the answer, ikigai, and you know what happened in that research to the people who said they did not have one. In Chicago, at Rush University, there is a long-running study called the Memory and Aging Project. Older adults come in for testing every year, and they agree to donate their brains when they die, which makes it one of the very few places on Earth where you can set what a person's mind was doing beside what was actually inside their head. They ask about purpose in life, whether your days point at something, whether anything is waiting for you. In 2009, a team led by the psychologist Patricia Boyle published what they had found in more than 1,200 older adults across 2 Chicago studies. Over the years that followed, the people who reported a stronger sense of purpose were less likely to have died than the people who reported less of it. Same city, same clinics, same ages. The next year, the same group published a second finding, this one in more than 900 people who had no dementia on the day they started. Stronger purpose, lower risk of developing Alzheimer's disease in the years that came after. If this is landing, take a second and subscribe. Every week I take something people over 60 get told to worry about and go and look at what the research actually says. So far, this is a questionnaire predicting who stays well and who does not. What they found inside the brains themselves is harder to shake. When the tissue was examined after death, there were people carrying the damage of Alzheimer's disease who had been thinking more clearly in life than that damage should have allowed. The difference tracked with purpose. The damage was there. It simply cost them less. There is a second piece, and it comes out of the longest study of its kind ever run. In 1921, a Stanford psychologist named Lewis Terman began following about 1,500 California school children. Terman himself was long gone before the answers came in, and the study carried on collecting them. Decades later, 2 psychologists, Howard Friedman and Leslie Martin, went back into 8 decades of files to work out who had actually lived the longest. They expected the cheerful ones, the happy-go-lucky children, the relaxed ones, the ones anybody would have bet on. That is not what the files said. The best personality predictor of a long life turned out to be conscientiousness. The careful, dependable, persistent ones. The people who kept showing up, who stayed useful to somebody, who had things they meant to finish. They published that. The advice industry went right on selling take it easy. So here is the question nobody asks a 100-year-old. What gets you up in the morning? I mean that literally. What gets you vertical on a Tuesday in February when nothing in particular is happening? Notice that the answer costs nothing and does not come from a pharmacy. It wants a reason, a time of day, and ideally, one other person who will notice if you do not turn up. Now the harder part, and I want to say it kindly, because it happens to people who did everything right. A man works 41 years. He is the one they call when the machine stops. On a Friday in June, there is a cake in the break room and a card everybody signed. And on Monday he wakes at 5:40. Because he has woken at 5:40 for 4 decades, and there is nowhere on earth he needs to be. The first week is a holiday. The second is quieter. By November, he is in the chair by the window with the television going, and he is fine. Everybody says he is fine. Nobody has waited for him at 9 in the morning since June, and nobody handed him a card for the other thing he lost that afternoon. The empty calendar is the warning sign, and it is the one nobody reads, because it looks exactly like rest. Here is the good news, and it is better than it sounds. None of that research asks you for a calling. Nobody in those questionnaires wrote down that they intended to cure a disease. A purpose can be embarrassingly small and still do the entire job. Tomatoes that will die if you do not water them. A dog with strong opinions about 7 in the morning. A Thursday coffee at the same table with the same 2 people. One of whom will telephone your house if the chair is empty. A grandson who cannot read yet and expects you to do the voices. And a purpose that small is one you can still keep at 87. So ask it now. Tonight, in your own kitchen, about 40 years before anybody with a notepad thinks to ask you. What gets me up in the morning? If the answer comes fast, good. Write it down anyway, then look at your week and find the hour it actually lives in. If you cannot find the hour, that is the thing to fix first. If the answer does not come tonight, you have just found the most useful thing in this video. It is a Tuesday, and a Tuesday can be changed. Call the person. Take the class you keep reading about. Plant the thing that will need you in April. Every single person in that Chicago study was already old on the day they answered the question. It counted anyway. So answer it in the comments. What gets you up in the morning? The honest answer, the small one. I read every single one, and I will tell you now, those answers are better company than any list of foods I have ever read. The lists were never the secret. The secret is having a reason to make the coffee tomorrow. Ask yourself the right question tonight, while the answer still has decades to work.